What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Surf and Sales Podcast. I'm Scott Leese here with my partner and co-founder, Richard Harris. How's it going, Richard?
It's going good, man. I had a chill holiday weekend, which was nice. Nothing too crazy. All-star game for the NBA sucked, of course, as it usually does. That was probably the highlight of my weekend. How was yours? You were in Florida, right?
No, I was in Florida a couple months ago. I got
Oh,
talking about different sports things. I spent all day. I did spend all day at the soccer field, though, watching my son play and refereeing a few games and stuff like that. I didn't even realize it was a holiday weekend.
of course you did. You never do.
I mean, you didn't work yesterday? I worked yesterday. I had a
A
normal day.
little bit, but I'm trying to move away from that. Hey, show up at a startup because we don't get the Monday holiday weekends off like we used to back in our Leap Fish days, Scott.
Nobody
Remember those?
nobody works less than you, Richard. You've got it figured out. I don't
You
know how you
taught
do
me.
it.
You taught me.
I need to teach myself all over again.
Yeah.
Hey, we're going to spend some time today talking to my friend Mark Fleming Jr., who is an entrepreneur. Man, I don't even know where to get started. He has experience in tech. He has experience in real estate and title insurance and banking all over the place. He had a Fortune 800 exit, made 40 under 40. This guy's a undercover madman is really what he is.
Dude,
And he likes to pretend like he's not any good at NBA 2K in this league that we're in together, but he beats me by like 30 or 40. So he's actually pretty good. And
so,
Mark, welcome to the show, man. Mark Fleming.
Hey, thanks for having me, Scott. I appreciate the intro. I still don't think I'm very good. You'd asked before we started recording what my record is. I think I'm
Yeah, what's
like
record?
I'm like 6-13, and I think two of the wins were against the computer. So I am not as good as you think
yeah.
I am. There's a lot of
Scott,
really good players.
Scott, Bodie will challenge you in NBA 2K
Yeah,
and
I'd be good.
probably mop the floor with you.
Yeah, I would like to play him actually. We'll see how I do. I'm 4-16 or something like that,
Yeah.
which is
Just,
four wins better than I did last year. So,
it sounds like it was 4 wins better than your fantasy football team, too.
well, I didn't have a good year there either, but
Yeah.
that's okay. The year before, I won the whole thing, so I'm afforded a down year. Which,
All right.
congratulations, Mark! Your Ohio State Buckeyes once again won the national championship.
Yeah. And my
Buckeye.
fantasy team actually won this year, first time ever in my
By,
kind
Big
of
year.
family league. Big
It's
year.
a
by,
big year for Mark.
by the way, Mark, just so you know, this whole our kids needs trophy shit, I blame on the Ohio State Buckeyes for those
Yeah.
stupid Buckeyes on the back of their helmets for all these decades. It's
Actually,
like,
it's funny you mentioned that because I think that is like one of the coolest parts
I'm
of being an
sure you
Ohio.
do.
There they are.
Right. Yeah.
Actually, and I ended up I got this magazine too recently, this one, because growing up I love Notre Dame, but I
Right.
actually think in all of college sports or really sports in general, I told my wife this as well. These colors together are like the best colors in sports, in my opinion. Like coolest helmets, coolest jerseys, like best fit. So you can
You're
blame
on
us.
cloud nine. You're on
Scott
cloud nine.
Scott's helmet has little weed leaves on it, right?
Oh yeah.
It's got
Yeah,
the 5 point
yeah.
weed leaf.
Yeah, no championships for Arizona State in a long time
Yeah.
in
You know
anything.
what? They had a
Yeah,
good game against the Buckeyes. I was old enough to remember. It's one of the first years I was really paying attention back in the Rose
yeah.
Bowl. They should have won that game. Maybe it was a really
Coulda,
good
shoulda,
game.
coulda, shoulda, coulda, shoulda. Well, tell
They,
everybody about your entrepreneurial journey, man. Specifically, a little bit about the business that you grew and ended up selling. I think that's where
yeah,
it would be a good place to begin.
cool. So yeah, I was actually at Miami University despite my Buckeye gear here. I'm from Columbus, so I think I get that pass for cheering for the Buckeyes, but went to Miami of Ohio and majored in finance there. And going into my senior year, summer of senior year, basically, or going into senior year, looking into internships and was like, maybe I'll go work for like Ameriprise Financial, Northwestern Mutual, and ended up, my dad had a background in real estate and kind of mentioned like, hey, maybe you should become a notary. I'm like, okay, cool. Let's see what that's all about. So I started to learn a little bit about that, went and worked with the title company, got my notary commission. And really, like the whole business that I created, it was called Signature Closers, and it started with just me as a notary. So college, part-time job, that's kind of what we did. And then as I had graduated, I went to work for Cardinal Health right out of school, big company. Figured out real quick that's not the right fit for me. I'm too entrepreneurial and need more moving parts than to be kind of the cog in the machine that I felt like there in that original role. And so jumped into employee benefits and some sales and some things kind of as the full-time role for the first 4 or 5 years of my career. But signature was always kind of on the back burner. So I had built kind of a small network of notaries, had at one point kind of a partner that was managing the scheduling. Then my mother-in-law got involved, ran it for a couple of years. And then really it became a full-time venture in 2012, like 2011, 2012. I met Chris Chapman at a company I was working at in Cincinnati, and he ended up being my technical co-founder. So like I was ready to be done. The business was maybe 100,000 of revenue, maybe making 10 or $20,000 a year, which is great for a side business with a young family, but it was like a ton of time.
How old were you at this point?
Oh gosh, I was 20, about 26, somewhere in that range, okay. 26, 27.
So you're 26, you're married, and you've got this, this nice little side hustle, right?
Yeah. It was good. It was just a lot. We had kids really early. So, I have two daughters, but 16 and 14. So at the time they were like, 4 or 2, maybe something like that, as I started to kind of transition to full time. And when I met Chris, it's kind of interesting. So Chris's brother, Tanner, and I, we lived together in a duplex with like 6 other guys, 2 sides of the duplex at Miami. And I didn't connect those dots till Chris and I got to know each other a little better. Like, oh, like that's your brother. Okay. Kind of small world thing. But we went to lunch at BW3's in Cincinnati and Blue Ash. And because he heard about this business and he'd been involved in some startups and kind of that tech ecosystem down there. And he's like, let's go to lunch. I'm going to hear about your business. I'm like, all right, cool. Like, yeah, I'm about to be done with this thing. It's like, it's great. It's nice amount of money, but like I'm working full time and then, I have young kids. And then after hours, I'm having to deal with like, moving stuff from a Google Calendar to QuickBooks. I'm having to invoice people, receive payments, pay our notaries. Just a lot for, kind of the amount of money we were making. Just hourly, it didn't add up to much. So ended up talking to him and I was like, I need to solve these problems. And he's like, let's just build a website, let's see what happens. And that was kind of the beginning of the story. We started to just, build, and essentially the agreement we came to is that he would grow into that business if we grew. And if not, then there was like no risk. So I'm like, well, this sounds like a pretty sweet deal, opportunity for me to take. And turned out, to be probably the best decision, or one of the best decisions we made. So ended up being my partner, building out a website of our own. We were the first company to integrate to Resware, which Scott's one of his prior companies, Qualia, actually ended up acquiring. And Resware at the time was, I would say, probably the premier platform for companies that were large national title companies, maybe still is underneath Qualia now. So all the large national companies started kind of leveraging or using this technology for their title production or kind of their enterprise system. And because we were the first to integrate, we had a really close relationship and we're able to start building, lots of features, lots of technology around, the beginning was like, just get your orders, get your docs from the system to another. And then we started to do notes and workflows and automations and all kinds of crazy stuff. So that really helped us continue to kind of start growing. And there's more of the story, but that's probably a good intro. I'll pause for you guys in case there's anything you wanted to ask.
I think this is, Scott and I've talked about this for a long time, and I say this tongue in cheek and with all the respect, because you had an exit, which is, some of the most successful startups are the old school pen and paper, most boring things in the world, right?
Yeah.
Like there's nothing super exciting about notary, right?
No.
Like it's, it is a necessary legal required function of many parts of life, right?
Sure.
And so there's nothing super exciting, but that's the stuff that's attractive in terms of like doing things, right? Like you can.
I think that's the big lesson right now. With
if you don't have AI, I'm going to go find any kind of paper process and just improve that.
Yeah, but a lot of companies trying to sell AI solutions right now are trying to sell to other tech companies, right? And if you instead take some of these automations and AI stuff and you go to these antiquated industries, the reaction is completely different. It's like, whoa, what the heck is this? I've never been exposed to that before, right? But it doesn't sound like that was a conscious really choice. You sort of just like
fell into it,
stumbled into the industry in a way, or got introduced in a way. It's not like you studied.
How much did your dad take?
Right?
Since it was your dad's idea.
Yeah, he should have. No, he didn't. He just kind of said, hey, you're doing all the hard work. But yeah, I know. Well, his idea was for me to be a notary. I don't think he ever envisioned that I would go and create this company that had, I mean,
right.
It was, to your point, I think it's an industry that's not still not super tech forward. And I know Scott knows this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I agree with you guys completely about the idea that taking this sort of level of technology and AI and automation into other industries that are probably more traditional creates a lot of opportunity, I think, because there's people that don't have any idea that this stuff exists. I mean, by the end of the time that we had built Signature out, we grew from, just me doing closing sporadically to managing 62,000 signings in a month. We had automated
Jesus.
text, automated calls, emails. We had a mobile app. So like 92% of the orders that we got went through this mobile app where basically it's kind of like, like I hate to say this, but like Uber sort of for notaries, but we had it
Yeah.
tiered based on their performance and their
Yeah.
history. So like you get notified, you accept the order or decline it, let us know why. But that was the only way we could scale. I mean, we only had 30 people to manage
Yeah.
that amount of volume. And, it was also very high, kind of like high cost to the notary, like high COGS, because 75% of what we made went right out the door. So we had to have that volume to really have a business that was worth, selling or growing or, whatever.
So,
So I definitely fell into it though. That's a fair
how
answer.
did you know? How did you know when it was time to sell? Because I think this is a big challenge, right? Because, a company gets to 20 million in
Hmm.
revenue and, you know, part of, granted, I'm a little bit older than both you guys. So I'd be like 20 million, fine. All right. Pay me 5 and I'm out the door. Right. Like so how do you know? How do you know when it's like, now's time? I assume you have advisors and VCs and all that who sort of help get you there, but how did you know financially when to do it, and how did you know emotionally when to do it? Because those are often two different things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good question. So it's interesting, like you mentioned, like so VC, we were bootstrapped throughout, which I think I'm an advocate for both. Like I think there's a path for both. I often see on the VC side, a little bit of a sidebar, but I think sometimes having money can be a problem because people try to solve their problems with money. So sometimes I think having a little bit of a limited budget can be helpful. So there's sort of both sides of the story. I think pouring money into something when there's like, we're going to put gasoline on this fire, like that's the perfect use of VC funds. So for us, we never really had that because we kind of grew organically. I mean, so we went from, I don't know, like the 100,000 of revenue to we were in the 6 to 8 million of revenue range for quite a while. And then, the last 3 years, kind of when I was involved from when before we sold the company or as we were selling it, we went to like 12 million, then 35 million, and then like 60 something million revenue was kind of that last year as we were transitioning. So obviously the upward trajectory for us was, a good thing in terms of like
Massive.
valuation and sale, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, massive. So that part was huge. The other thing for me, so I think it's a very personal decision. I mean, like you mentioned, emotionally, there were a lot of considerations. So in the world of real estate, and Scott can speak to this, every single one of those transactions has, people moving into these homes, thousands of dollars of commissions, like a very high level of potentially stress and issues that can arise if something happens. And notaries, by and large, almost all, I mean, pretty much all of our notaries were independent contractors. So while you have a degree of control over the process and you do your best to vet, people are human, they make mistakes. And as a smaller business, even with building out layers of infrastructure and people to manage the process, anything that went wrong oftentimes would bubble up, right? So 10 o'clock, and we have clients everywhere. So we're like,
Yeah.
I'm in Columbus,
Work in every
Ohio.
time zone. Yeah.
Oh, it's everywhere. So, we're out to dinner. It's like 10 p.m. our time on a Friday night, and the closing blows up in California. And, if it's a massive customer of ours, oftentimes I get roped in. So that was always really challenging. The transactional nature of our business, also in terms of cash flow, was never great because we would have to pay the notaries in a timely manner. Often we'd be floating maybe for 10, 15 days. There was sort of this, some of our clients would pay us, per closing, it'd be really quick. Others, big customers, might be like a monthly invoice. So, one of our bigger customers at the time of sale was Loan Depot, or Closing USA was kind of the title company connected to Loan Depot. They might have had, $1 million bill, let's say, or something that they owe us. And, we would pay the notaries and like, we're kind of banking on the fact, I hope they pay, like
Yeah. I hope
it's a
they
big,
pay. Right. Yeah.
because, they joked when we sold, they're like, well, any amount of money that you guys float out there, the difference between, what you're paying and what you're owed, like kind of the bank of Fleming, like we hadn't diversified to do or like kind of protected ourselves in the sense with a line of credit. I tried to steer clear, just didn't want the debt. Or really, I mean, operating debt, I guess. So probably would have been like we were right at the point where we were big enough then that I was like, let's explore that right as we were selling. So those were all like really factors
But what
for
was it?
me.
Was it like, I'm done? Hey, the market is ripe, right? the interest rates, I don't know when you did it, the interest rates were still
Yeah.
low, right? Like
Yep.
this is the time to do it. And I can now get an exit where I can literally have some FU money and go do my next entrepreneur. Like, what was it for you, Mark, that said
Yeah.
this? Or was it your partner who was like, okay, Mark, it's time?
You know, it's funny. It wasn't Chris. So Chris Chapman was my partner. He was definitely the guy who would keep me on course when I was like, hey, we should do 50 different things. Because like back in like 2012 or 13, I was like, hey, like we have it in our base camp, you know, still to this day, I think, unless he deleted it now. But I was like, we should have our technology and like let title companies use it, self-manage their signings. And he's like, no, dude, we got to stay the course. And I'm like, all right, cool. So we did it.
Yeah,
Fast
Mark,
forward
stay the
years.
course and answer my question.
Fair. That's fair.
Like,
All right. So the trigger for me, I think, ultimately, I wasn't looking to sell. I had a company reach out that was like, hey, you know, would you guys consider this? Because it was right around the time of remote online notary. And it was a driver for us to say, yeah, like you at the time, I think we were the largest notary signing service in the country. And they recognized that that sort of expertise and what we were good at would be a good partnership for their digital platform. So I was like, like, you know, interesting. This was a company that had like 120 developers and like no infrastructure. I was intrigued because they wanted to build something together. But then I actually reached out to Stewart Title and a couple of other companies in my network just to say, you know, hey, is this something we're not out there marketing, trying to sell, but like, would you be interested? Do you think this is a conversation we should have? And, you know, it's kind of like the perfect storm. So it was one of those things where it just sort of worked out. It wasn't like I was like, this is the moment we have to do it. But as we started to get inbound interest, I did recognize, I was smart enough, I think, to recognize interest rates were very low. And there's only so many people that can refi at 3%. So, like, you know, Stewart wasn't stupid either. So when we came to our evaluation, it was like, yeah, we understand there's like sort of a limited trajectory of how much you can keep doing this because we were very heavy refi. So it's just like this perfect storm of things. And really, it was somebody reaching out to us with inbound interest combined with all of those stressors. And then also for our team, there wasn't a lot of upward mobility because we were a small business. So Stewart gave us that opportunity to kind of like build into a bigger organization and give our team a better upside too. So,
But now that you hold on, now
no, go
that
ahead.
you
Yeah. I asked
now
too
that you
much.
now that you sell the business,
mhm.
it's got to be difficult to stay motivated or figure out what the heck to do next. You know, Bill
Mhm.
Walsh used to talk about this thing called success disease.
Mhm.
It's like you win the championship and then everybody lets down a little bit, exhales a little bit, and it's like
Mhm.
so difficult to repeat. It's one of the reasons why nobody's ever three-peated, right?
Mhm.
And you get this outcome, this accomplishment. It's like the culmination of decades of work,
Yeah.
whatever. And now you've got this like identity crisis of sorts, or this void, and it's like, what's my purpose? Who the fuck am I? What am I supposed to do all day?
Mhm.
Right?
Totally.
How do you figure out like what am I going to do next, if anything? And I know I'm asking this question tongue in cheek a little bit because I know you've kind of struggled with this a little bit in trying to find your exact next purpose. So, do you have any tips or like, can you talk a little bit about what that journey has been like for you?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that because I think that's like a really important question for people that have gone through a situation like we've had. Like it's a blessing, and I don't want to call it a curse, but it's a challenge, right? Because to your point, your identity, I think, as a business owner in particular, can easily become wrapped up in what you
Yeah.
do for a living, right? I mean, and that can be anybody. It doesn't even have to be somebody who owns a company, right? It could be like, hey, I was at this company 20 years and now who am I? Retired. You know, I see that
Yeah.
oftentimes with
And you
people.
and you've had this like super intense sort of drive, this like go, 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 go kind
Yep.
of mentality. And then all of a sudden that shuts off and it's like, what am I supposed to do with all that energy?
Well, and that's to your point, it is a journey because I was with Stuart through November of 23. We sold in January of 21 and then or end of January. And then I was there for like 2.5, almost 3 years, right? So closing in on 3 years. So for a period of time, I didn't really have to deal with that because I was still sort of integrated into that larger group. And I was definitely not as motivated just because I think part of it is, you know, you just lose an element of control, right? Like Chris and I had put together an idea of like,
Yeah.
hey, this is the direction. Here's what we think you should do. And they're a big company. And so they had some other things they had prioritized. And, they're actually starting to do some of the things we talked about a few years back, which is great. But it's a little different because, there's just less, it's just hard to be as motivated when it's not yours. You don't have the total control.
So
So
do you try to come to terms with that and accept it, or are you driven to like redirect the energy and build something new? Like what's it
yeah,
been like, you know?
it's kind of both. I mean, so I ended up, as you know, Scott, like we kind of co-worked on a company called DataFlick. And I kind of got pulled into that initially as an advisor. So one of the co-owners is a friend or somebody I've known for a long time. And he was like, "Hey, I have this real estate business or whatever. And, we're doing about $200,000 of sales monthly. So a couple, maybe a couple million of revenue. And I'd love to have you advise." And so like I kind of backed into that and we can talk more about kind of how that played out. But I think for me, like the journey is ongoing, right? Because like I don't think I've solved that puzzle. I think for me, it also comes back to the way I grew up, which was like very achievement oriented, performance oriented, whether it was school,
Yeah.
whether it was work, whether it was whatever. And I'm actually working actively to kind of unwind that now because to your point, like having an exit like this gives us the opportunity, like the Fleming family, to kind of say, well, what do we want things to
Right.
look like and how do I want to spend my time? Like I think that's a big part of the journey is just like reflecting on, okay, like who do I want to be outside of work? What's important to me? What are my hobbies? Do I want to beat Scott Leese by 50 in 2K? Do I want to, play pickleball and let him beat me by 50,
Yeah.
probably in pickleball? Like those are the things that I'm spending some time on. I'm still motivated though. Like
If you're spending that much time thinking about Scott Leese, you and I need to have some therapy
well,
conversations.
He just
And,
thinking about
and by the
beating
way,
you.
I say that as a recovering Scott Leeseaholic myself.
mm,
Like
Just want to beat me and everything. That's what
I
I'm doing.
wanted to be Scott. You guys asked, well, what'd you want to do right away? Like I took a course, Justin Welsh has a pretty big following on LinkedIn. I took his course and, it works. Like you can do some of those things, but for me, it didn't feel authentic to my, who I am and really growing my brand in that way. And
Mm.
so, I have kid like, yeah, I want to be Scott Leese, man, when I grow up. So I think we all, have that aspiration, Richard.
there you go.
Yeah,
There's the
well, I
snippet
have an
that Scott
aspiration.
Leese.
I have an aspiration for building my company to $60 million and
Yeah,
exiting
yeah,
and
and then
going
Yeah,
through
doing
an
nothing.
exit and going
you
through an
did it.
existential crisis. I'd rather do that. I'd rather do that.
Right.
Yeah, I
So
hear you.
I have another question. So Mark, when you get acquired, right? You're acquired in 21. You stuck around to 23. I
Mhm.
assume, and I use this term, loosely of like the golden handcuffs, right? Like people need to understand, like you get
Yeah.
acquired, you don't always just get to leave. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you got to stick around
Mhm.
and I don't know if this was for you. Some of your payout may be a bonus and like, some metrics incentives, right? That to me feels like the hardest part to be motivated at. Like those last 2 years of like, okay, I accomplished this. I've got an exit, but not really unless we hit these certain metrics or goals. And I don't know if that was your case, right?
Sure.
But I'm sure you've talked to other people. And Scott, I'm sure you've talked to people about this. How do you stay motivated there?
Yeah. No, that's a really good question. So, excuse me. Interestingly enough, for me, there really almost all of the transaction was like kind of an upfront. This is it. There was some escrow and there was some holdback
Right.
and some things like that. But because of the nature of our business and how we were trying to integrate into Stewart, they really did not want to do an earnout. I don't know that that's common across, other acquisitions, whether that's within Stewart or otherwise. I think it was a combination of things. So for me, that was less of a motivator or much less of a concern. But
Yeah, you didn't have
certainly,
to deal
like,
with that.
yeah,
You
I
didn't
didn't
have
have
to deal with
that. I
that.
didn't have to
Yeah.
deal with it. But I would say, like, I definitely think that there's something to that. Like, if I were acquiring a business, I guess it sort of depends on the goals and how easy it is to track and get everybody aligned. So to your point, though, I think it is, for a lot of people, probably a massive, like I know there are other companies and business owners I've gotten to know that, like I know a guy right now, he's hung around because there's some upside. And so they've tied that back to incentives. Most of my incentives are really tied to the performance of the business. So like in theory, I could have left like the next day after the transaction. I don't think I would have made any friends, right? But like, in theory, I could have done that with our setup. So it's different, I guess, just depending on the situation.
I think that would be really hard to sit there and go from this thing that you used to have total control over to having virtually none, to go from having a normal bank account to a fat bank account and looking around and being like, what am I listening to this guy for? what do I don't want to be here. What am I supposed to do? That's why, I feel like you got to redirect that energy somehow into something, other projects, whatnot.
Hmm.
And I don't know if, I mean, you're going through it a little bit, but I don't know if you can bounce around and fill that void with lots of little projects, or if you're going to be compelled at some point to try to take one more big swing and do something like that, you put your full energy and effort behind. Do you feel that compulsion? Maybe that's the wrong word, but do you feel that like inside of you, or are you still in this like almost nesting phase of like, I'll try this a little bit of that. I feel play some pickleball, figure out who I am, you know?
I feel yeah, it's funny timing because I've had some conversations. So this is kind of back to one of the original points you guys made during this.
It might be a better question for his wife.
Maybe, she would definitely have some input on that. I would say, like taking a swing at something, it's in the back of my mind because I'm realizing like so within Dataflick, for example, Scott and I had an opportunity to kind of like help build that infrastructure. I ended up making like a seed investment, or we did, worked as kind of the interim COO. We grew the business from a couple million to like 7 million, give or take, in revenue. But I realized I don't have control, right? So like even then, if I think, the path that we should take is a different path than kind of the founders and the people that are running the business want us to take, that's frustrating. Like, so to Scott's point, like directing my energy and really helping grow a business is something that's still on my mind. And you guys had mentioned earlier, excuse me, um, I'm talking with a company that actually is pretty active in AI, and what they do is they go into companies that are more of your traditional businesses and do exactly what you guys kind of mentioned earlier, which is like, hey, let's look at automation, let's look at how we can implement AI. So I'm kind of still exploring, kind of tinkering some of those collaborations. To your point, Scott, like, I don't think there's anything defined. I would never write off that I'm like never, ever, ever going to dive in and start something new. Cause I mean, I just have a lot of ideas. There are things that I'd like to do, but for this phase of my life, for sure, I think it's probably
Yeah.
going to be a slower phase, kind of nesting phase you mentioned.
Yeah. And the debate of how do I execute on these ideas? Do I have somebody else do it through investment vehicles or
Sure.
partnerships or whatever versus no, this one is mine. I'm going
Yeah.
all in on that. Yeah.
And I'd have to love it, like you understand as somebody who's been in some
Yeah.
businesses, you have to love it, you have to be
Yeah.
passionate. I want to wake up like because I do have that optionality or a little bit of choice, I want to wake up and like just be like, yes, I love this, I'm into it. But I also don't want it to consume me. Signature and really anything that I've dove into,
That
even Dataflick, it's
that's
consuming me.
maybe that's how you know if you're ready or not, because you just said, I don't want it to consume me. And
Hmm.
I don't know if anybody can build something and say, I don't want it to consume me and have it be a big, huge success.
Right. I agree. And that's, I think, part of the reason why I'm hesitant to
Yeah.
say, yeah, I'm going to
Yeah.
dive in. With the right partner, I think, to your point, if I could add value and somebody else is like, I love this and I can help them, that's where, like, at this point, I feel like I can direct some energy because I still love solving problems. I read Start with Why or Find Your Why, Simon Sinek recently, and it talks a lot about like, your to statement, so that. And I'm like, I think for me, it's like seeing things that others can't, is kind of part of what I like to do so that we can build something that doesn't exist. So it's kind of like seeing what could be and, replacing what is. Like, I love
Yeah.
that. So if I can add value in that way, like that's kind of where my head's at. But to your point, you have to find the right person, the right partner, the right
Yeah.
opportunity, and it takes time. So like to me, that is a journey. If people are in that situation where they're exploring, it's easier said than done. It sounds like, it's like like you said, it's not a bad problem to have, but it's still definitely a challenge to figure out how to redirect
Right.
your energy.
Right.
So
Right.
so Richard, let me
What a
reverse the
Buckeye
question.
answer.
What if
Yeah.
you had $1 billion? And
Yeah.
maybe you did. I
Oh,
don't know you that
Yeah.
well, Richard, but what would you
Let's
do?
hear your Georgia answer, Richard. You're
oh, I
representing the
would.
state of Georgia now.
Oh, the most obnoxious thing I'd probably do is I would certainly buy someplace down in Costa Rica or whatever. I would easily do that. I would most definitely fly private. I would probably try to find a way to become a minority owner in a professional sports team,
Okay.
Love
or
that one.
Yeah, I would
right.
probably, okay, that's on my list
You
too.
know, I might. I mean, but maybe this is your next one too. Is like, how do you streamline the whole NIL issue? Because I bet that shit's fucking paperwork.
Oh man.
That's there, that, I would probably get involved in, some of that stuff. I don't know. Those are my obnoxious things,
That's a good one. That's a good one.
The
I like
sports
that.
team,
I like that NIL opportunity. That
Yeah.
something is going to happen there for sure. For
Yeah.
sure.
So, and at technological level, it's got to happen because
Oh.
right now it just feels like you put them in the portal, it make it sound like they're on Tinder or something like that. Or maybe there needs to be a Tinder. Maybe there should be a Tinder for the NIL portal. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's
Well, we're moving towards the end of the show here, Mark. We appreciate you spending some time with us, man, and talking about your entrepreneurial journey. We usually say to people here at the end, how can we be helpful to you? Do you have any questions for us? So is there anything?
Yeah, if you need us to help spend some of that money, you just ask. I got some ideas.
Anything on your mind? Any burning questions for Richard or I?
Well, I think Richard has, he has an idea that we have more than we have to burn. So, Richard, I wish I could help you out. I'm sorry. No, I mean, as far as, the ways to be helpful, I guess once I figure out exactly what it is I'm going to be doing when I grow up here, I mean, I have a couple irons in the fire. I may be reaching out to you guys about that. But no, I think this has been great. And I really enjoyed, talking with you guys, kind of shooting the breeze a little bit. And, if you come across, if there's anybody out there that's listening or that you guys have as followers, Scott or otherwise, now that you're out of LinkedIn jail, back from the dead.
Yeah, back from the dead.
Back from the dead. If there's anything I can do to be helpful, like I'm always interested in just, ideas and helping people and kind of figuring out what's next. So it's all part of the journey. So got some time if anybody's looking to shoot the shit about anything interesting.
All right. Well, we appreciate you, Mark. Richard, good to see you again, man.
You too, my man.
Thanks for hanging out. And we will see everybody next time on the Surf and Sales podcast. By the way, check out surfandsales.com. We are down to about a half dozen tickets or so for our event in Portugal in early October. So we hope
that should be the most obnoxious thing Mark does is like get 3 or 4 of his closest friends to come to Surf and Sales and pay for it for him. That would be cool.
That would rank pretty high. That would be cool.
All
right, everybody.
All right, buddy. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.